Glenn Mercer was sitting in Iris's reading chair when I stepped through the front door of my own cottage. He had a cold Molson in his hand, boots still on, feet resting on the cedar chest Iris and I had dragged home from an antique barn outside Halliburton the summer before she died. He looked up at me without surprise, without embarrassment. He grinned. "Miles," he said, spreading both arms wide. "We were wondering when you'd get here." I didn't answer right away. One of the things that comes with being 67 is you learn to take 2 seconds before you open your mouth in a moment like that one. 2 seconds to count what's in the room. 2 seconds to decide whether what you're looking at is a misunderstanding or something else entirely. What I was looking at was not a misunderstanding. I'd like to tell you I handled the next several minutes with perfect calm. Some of it I did. But the part that actually mattered happened in the 17 minutes between when I called the Ontario Provincial Police and when their cruiser turned off County Road 21. By the time the officer knocked on my door, Glenn Mercer's face had gone the color of old cement, and his wife Donna had quietly stopped reorganizing my kitchen shelves. Stay with me. Because what happened over the weeks that followed taught me something about family and property, and the particular arrogance of people who mistake access for ownership that I wish I'd understood 30 years earlier. My name is Miles Ashby. I'm 67, born in Barrie, Ontario, and I spent 32 years as a cabinet maker running a small shop off Bayfield Street before my knees made that decision for me. I have one son. His name is Caden. He's 35, works in environmental consulting out of Toronto, calls every Sunday whether or not he has anything specific to say. That habit came from his mother, and I'm glad it survived her. My wife Iris passed away 4 years ago. A stroke fast in March, before the snow was even off the ground. I won't dress that up. Some losses don't have softer versions. You just carry them differently as time goes on. Iris loved one place above all others. A 3-bedroom cottage on a small lake in the Halliburton Highlands, about 4 hours north of Toronto. We bought the property in 2002, when Caden was still losing his second set of teeth and I was still working 6 days a week. The land was cheap because it needed everything. The dock was rotten, the roof had 2 tarps over it, the front steps were a genuine safety hazard. But Iris walked through that screen door, looked out over the water and said, "This place already feels like ours." So we bought it. Over the years I rebuilt the dock myself, replaced the roof in 2009, added a sunroom on the south side that Iris drew the plans for on graph paper at the kitchen table over the course of one February. I framed it up the following May and she was reading in it by June. She planted a perennial garden along the east wall, full of things that came back every year without being asked. She kept a ceramic loon on the windowsill above the kitchen sink because, she said, a cottage kitchen without a loon is just a kitchen. The thing I remember most is the paddle. Our first summer there, Iris took a woodworking course at the Arts Center in Halliburton Village and hand-painted a canoe paddle. It took her 3 weekends. A loon in flight on a gray-blue background and our name, Ashby, along the blade in her own careful lettering. We hung it on the wall above the fireplace. It belongs there the way the lake belongs outside the window. After she died, I didn't go up to the cottage for nearly a full year. The quiet was the wrong kind. Eventually I started going back for long weekends, sweeping the sunroom, checking on the garden, sitting on the dock watching the loons. Grief does this strange thing where it starts as something unbearable and slowly, becomes something you can actually hold. That spring I decided to properly restore the place. New dock boards, updated propane connections, a proper railing on the sunroom steps. Not to sell it, never that. I wanted it sound, protected, ready for Caden and Amber if they ever had children. Iris built that place with her own time and care, and I intended to see it outlast both of us. My son Caden had married Amber 2 years prior. Amber was a graphic designer, warm-natured, quick to laugh, the kind of person who remembers your food allergies and your mother's birthday in the same breath. Her parents, Glenn and Donna Mercer, lived outside Mississauga. Glenn had owned a landscaping company that had gone under, and before that a parking management operation that had also gone under, and before that something involving a storage unit franchise he preferred not to discuss. Donna volunteered at her church and smiled with every part of her face except her eyes. I noticed that early, some people just do. I didn't dislike them exactly, but I noticed the way Glenn looked at things he didn't own, not with envy, with a kind of patient inventory, like he was already cataloging them for later. The trouble arrived on a Friday in May. I'd left Barrie that morning with a thermos of coffee, a folder of contractor quotes, and a bag of groceries. The plan was to meet a plumber named Al at the cottage at 1 o'clock to look at the propane line, then spend the weekend working on the dock railing alone. I stopped at the Tim Hortons in Minden for a refill and a blueberry muffin, and the woman at the counter told me the highway had been clear all morning. Good day for it, she said. I told her I'd been waiting for it all winter. I turned onto County Road 21 at noon. That's when I noticed the gate standing open. It should have been shut. I keep it latched, not locked, but latched. Then the tire tracks in the soft gravel, wide, recent, the kind a trailer leaves. I slowed before the bend. When the cottage finally came into view, I stopped the truck entirely. 3 vehicles in my driveway. Glenn's silver pickup, which I recognized immediately, a white Jeep I'd never seen, and backed up to the side of the cottage, a budget rental trailer with its rear door rolled open. My dock boards, which Al had dropped off the week before, had been stacked to one side to make room. The outdoor chairs Iris and I had bought at the Minden Co-op were moved off the deck and onto the lawn. Smoke was rising from the barbecue, and through the screen door I could already hear music playing, easy and comfortable, the kind of volume that says the people playing it believe they have every right to be exactly where they are. I sat there for maybe 15 seconds. Then I turned off the engine, took my phone off the passenger seat, and walked up to my own front door. Glenn was in Iris's reading chair. Donna was in my kitchen, rearranging things in the cupboard above the sink, her back to me. Glenn's brother Derek was somewhere down the hall. I could hear him moving boxes. In the sunroom, 2 teenagers I had never seen were stretched across Iris's love seat with a portable speaker, shoes on, feet up. On the windowsill above the kitchen sink, the ceramic loon was gone. I noticed that before I noticed anything else. Glenn turned around and spread his arms. Miles, good timing. We were about to put the stakes on. I looked at the open trailer. I looked at Donna's hands in my cupboard. I looked at the empty windowsill where Iris's loon had lived for 22 years. Then I looked at Glenn. What exactly are you doing in my cottage? Donna closed the cupboard door slowly. Glenn chuckled. The kind of chuckle designed to make the other person feel like they're overreacting. Relax, he said. Caden gave Amber the lockbox code last fall. We figured we'd get a head start opening things up for the season, save everyone the trouble later. Opening things up for whose season? Family cottage, Donna said over her shoulder like she was explaining something to a child. One day this all goes to Caden and Amber anyway. We're not strangers, Miles. One of the teenagers in the sunroom laughed at something on the speaker. Glenn raised his Molson toward the lake. Exactly. No need to make it awkward. We thought we'd bring a few things up, make it more comfortable for everyone going forward. I have been angry in my life. I have lost contracts, lost arguments, lost people I could not afford to lose. I have driven 4 hours home from a hospital in the dark, not knowing what the next morning was going to look like. But standing in the cottage Iris and I had built out of a rotten shell and 20 years of weekends, watching Glenn Mercer rest a beer can on her cedar chest with no more ceremony than he'd give a gas station counter, I felt something go very still inside me. I took out my phone. Glenn's chuckle stopped. Who are you calling? I looked at him directly, the OPP. That changed the room immediately. Donna turned around fully for the first time. Derek appeared at the hallway entrance, a cardboard box still in his hands. One of the teenagers pulled out earbuds. Come on, Miles. Glenn stood up. Don't be dramatic. We're family here. I pressed call and gave the dispatcher my name, the civic address, and said clearly, I have a group of people on my property who entered without my knowledge or permission. They've brought a rental trailer and appear to be moving belongings in. I am the registered owner. I'm requesting an officer. Glenn set his beer down. That was the first sensible thing he'd done since I arrived. While we waited, nobody moved another box. Nobody mentioned the word family again. Glenn tried twice to start explaining. I held up one hand each time and said, save it for the officer. Constable Nakashima arrived 16 minutes later. She had a calm, deliberate way of moving and the kind of voice that makes clear she's already heard every version of every story. I showed her my property tax notice, the deed PDF I keep in my phone, and my driver's license. Glenn interrupted her 3 times. Each time she said, with precisely the same tone, Sir, I'm speaking with the property owner right now. Those 7 words did more than anything else in that room. I walked Constable Nakashima through the cottage, the open trailer, the boxes stacked in the hall, Donna's reorganized cupboards, the empty windowsill. Then we found the second thing. On the side table in the guest room, beside a stack of Glenn's fishing magazines, was an envelope from Enbridge addressed to Glenn Mercer at my cottage's civic address. Constable Nakashima photographed it without a word. Glenn's face went completely flat. Constable Nakashima informed everyone present that they were required to leave and that returning to the property without my written permission would constitute trespass under the Trespass to Property Act. She took names, she took plate numbers, she gave me an occurrence number and told me to use it if they came back. Glenn stood in the gravel while Derek loaded the boxes back into the trailer. He watched me the entire time. Not with embarrassment, with the look of a man who believes he's been wronged by physics. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly, once the others were far enough away. "Amber isn't going to thank you for this." I looked out at the lake. The water was still in the late afternoon light. "Glenn," I said, "the mistake was assuming that your daughter's marriage handed you a deed." His mouth opened. Nothing useful came out. A locksmith from Minden arrived before Glenn's trailer had finished backing out of the lane. I'd called him while the OPP was still on site. He changed both locks, reset the key lockbox with a new code, and helped me mount a camera above the front door. By early evening, every old code was dead. Then I called my son, Caden. He answered on the second ring. "Hey Dad, how's the cottage looking?" I closed my eyes for a moment. "Caden, did you give Glenn the lockbox code?" A silence then. "I gave Amber the code, last fall. For the winter check, remember? You asked someone to go up if the temperature dropped hard and you couldn't get away. Why are you?" His voice changed. "Dad, what happened?" I told him everything, not dramatically. Not with any particular emotion in my voice, just the facts. The trucks, the trailer, the boxes in the hall, the Enbridge envelope, the teenagers on Iris's love seat, the empty windowsill. By the time I finished, the line was quiet. Then I heard him say, away from the phone, low and flat, "Amber, come here." There is a specific kind of pain in watching your child realize someone they trusted has used that trust to hurt someone they love. It doesn't feel like anger. It feels more like watching a door close on something that was already fragile. Caden called back 20 minutes later. She told her parents about the lockbox when Glenn asked how the cottage was kept secure in winter. She says she told him it was only for genuine emergencies and that they'd need your permission before going up. She didn't know about the trailer. She didn't know about any of it. "I believe her," I said, and I meant it, but that didn't make any of it smaller. The next morning my neighbor Herb Kowalski called. He lives 2 cottages east and has been year-round since he retired from teaching. Herb notices everything. "Miles," he said, "I don't know if it matters, but I saw that silver pickup parked at your gate last Thursday evening. Just sitting there for maybe 40 minutes. I thought it was strange." That was 3 days before they arrived. Glenn had been scouting. It was the second thing Herb told me that required a full minute of silence to absorb. He'd walked down to the water the previous Saturday and noticed Glenn and Derek unloading something from the truck. It had been wrapped in plastic sheeting, roughly the length and width of a mounted sign, the kind hung at the end of a cottage lane or from a dock post. He'd taken a photo on his phone. He texted it to me while we were still talking. You couldn't make out the text through the sheeting, but the shape was unmistakable. The Ashby Cottage sign Iris had painted herself, with a loon above the letters and our name in her own hand, had hung at the end of our lane since 2007. When I went to check it that morning, 2 of the mounting screws were loose. Someone had already been testing it. I sat in Iris's reading chair for a long time after that. If you have ever had someone make plans to quietly replace something your wife painted with her own hands, with something bearing a different family's name, you already understand that the feeling it produces is not quite anger. It is something colder. It is the recognition that the person you are dealing with stopped asking a long time ago. They were simply waiting for you to remain polite enough not to notice. I was done being that polite. I called my lawyer the following Monday. Her name is Constance Webb. She is 69, handles estate and property law out of a firm in Barrie, wears reading glasses on a beaded chain, and has a way of being warm and absolutely immovable at the same time. She handled all of Iris's estate and the cottage title transfer. I trust her because she does not confuse kindness with softness. I gave her the occurrence number, emailed the photographs, sent Herb's photo of the wrapped sign, told her about the Enbridge envelope, Glenn's scouting visit, the loose screws. Constance was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Miles, that wasn't an opportunistic visit, that was a rehearsal." That word, a rehearsal, it shifted how I understood everything I'd seen. Over the following week, more came to light. Enbridge confirmed someone had called to update the mailing contact for the property address. A contractor from Halliburton Village called asking if Mr. Mercer still wanted a quote on a storage shed to be added at the back of the lot, and Herb found a business card Glenn had left near his boathouse the previous Thursday, tucked under a brick. On the back, in Glenn's handwriting, "Back corner lot, check setback requirements." He had been trying to determine whether he could build on my land. When Herb told me that, I didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. When somebody is bold enough to plan construction on a property they don't own, they have already moved well past asking. They are simply waiting for you to stay too uncomfortable to stop them. Constance sent certified trespass notices under the Trespass to Property Act to Glenn Mercer, Donna Mercer, and Derek Mercer. She sent a separate formal letter to my daughter-in-law Amber, not accusatory, but stating clearly that no member of the Mercer family had been granted access rights to the Ashby property, and that my son Caden had no independent authority to extend such rights to anyone. She also sent an invoice, lock replacement, camera installation, locksmith call-out, and 3 hours of her own preliminary review time. Total, $2,340. Enough to be real. Enough to make clear this was not a family inconvenience. It was trespass, and trespass has a cost. Glenn called the day the notice arrived. I let it go to voicemail. The second call I let go as well. On the third I answered and said, "You have Constance's number." He came in loud. "You sent me a bill for visiting my own daughter's family property." "I sent you an invoice," I said, "for entering a property you don't own, without permission, with a rental trailer, after scouting it 3 days earlier and attempting to redirect utility mail to your name." He went quiet at that last part. Then, "You're going to poison the well between Caden and Amber over this." "No," I said. "You may have already started that yourself. I'm making sure there are clear records of how. That cottage will belong to them one day regardless. My son Caden may benefit from what I choose to leave him. That is not the same thing as you having any claim to it now or ever. You can't lock family out of a family property forever." I looked through the window at the cedar tree Iris planted the year Caden finished university. "Watch me," I said, and ended the call. 2 days later, Glenn proved he had learned nothing at all. The camera over the front door sent an alert to my phone at 8:40 on a Saturday morning. I was home in Barrie in my slippers, finishing a second cup of coffee. The screen showed Glenn at the gate, Donna in the passenger seat. Glenn punched the old lockbox code. Nothing. He tried again. Then he put both hands on the gate and shook it. I called the OPP non-emergency line with the occurrence number. An officer arrived 20 minutes later. I watched the whole thing on my phone, coffee cooling in my hand. Glenn argued. Donna pointed toward the cottage. The officer pointed toward the road. Glenn produced some kind of paper from his jacket. The officer looked at it and handed it back. Then Glenn reversed the truck out too fast and was gone. That was the first time I smiled through any of it. Not because I enjoyed watching it. Because the system worked, the moment I stopped assuming it would sort itself out on its own. The following Sunday, my son Caden and my daughter-in-law Amber came to my house. Amber held on when she hugged me and didn't let go right away. Caden looked like a man who had not been sleeping at any level that would register as adequate. Good, some things should cost you sleep. We sat at the kitchen table, I made tea, nobody touched it. Amber went first. "Miles," she said, "I am so sorry. I told my dad about the lockbox when he asked how the cottage was kept safe in winter. I told him it was only for genuine emergencies and that he would need to call you before using it. I swear to you I did not know about the trailer. I didn't know about any of it." I nodded, then I asked her one question. "Did you know about the sign?" She looked at Caden, then back at me. "What sign?" I described what Herb had photographed. A replacement sign wrapped in plastic already prepared. The Ashby name gone. Iris's painted loon gone. Something else ready to go up in its place. Amber put one hand over her mouth. She did not speak for a long moment. Then, very quietly, "I knew my dad had been talking about the cottage. I didn't know it had gone that far." That was the moment I stopped being angry at my daughter-in-law Amber. Not because she was entirely blameless, she wasn't. But shame had arrived in her the way it was supposed to, and she wasn't trying to talk her way out from under it. Caden looked at me across the table. "What do we do now?" I had been ready for that question. "Now," I said, "we make sure none of this can happen again." Constance came to my house the following Thursday with her portfolio. She prefers meeting in person. She says documents signed at a kitchen table carry more weight than ones executed by email, and after 40 years of practice I don't argue with her instincts. My son Caden and my daughter-in-law Amber sat across from me. Constance walked through everything slowly. First, the cottage would be transferred into an Ashby family trust. I would retain full control while living. Caden would have beneficial rights after I was gone, but the property could never be sold, mortgaged, leased, renamed, or transferred without trustee approval. Access would require written permission. Codes would be individual, logged, and revocable. No spouse or in-law would hold independent access rights, ever. Second, Caden signed a written acknowledgement that the cottage was Ashby family property, separate from the matrimonial home, and that no member of the Mercer family had present or future rights to it. His own independent lawyer had reviewed it the previous week. He signed without hesitation. Third, Constance had prepared a protected education fund for any grandchildren I might one day have. Caden read that section twice before he looked up. When he did, his voice was not entirely steady. "Dad," he said, "you didn't have to do this." "I know," I said, "that's exactly why I did." Amber wiped her eyes. Neither of them tried to talk me out of a single page. There was one more document. A formal letter to Glenn and Donna Mercer, advising them they were permanently barred from the property, the lane, the dock, and any property held in the Ashby Family Trust. It included the occurrence number, the Saturday gate incident, and the invoice, with a payment deadline of 30 days. Caden read it twice. Then he said, "I'll make sure they pay it." Amber looked at him steadily. "They pay it," she said, "not us." Something about the way she said it made both of us look at her. "They caused this," she said, "not us." She looked at her husband. "They pay it themselves." Caden held her gaze. Then he nodded slowly. It was the best decision either of them made that afternoon, and they made it together. Glenn was not finished. Men like Glenn Mercer are never finished until something actually stops them from the outside. 3 weeks later, he drove to Caden and Amber's condo in Toronto. I know because my daughter-in-law Amber called me from their bedroom while my son Caden kept Glenn in the living room. Her voice wasn't shaking with fear. It was shaking with fury. "He says you've manipulated all of us," she said. "He says Caden should contest the acknowledgement. He says I should be on his side." "What do you want me to do?" I asked. She said, "Come, please." I called Constance from the car. She was always available for the right kind of trouble. We arrived within 40 minutes. Glenn was standing in the living room, face red, pointing in Caden's direction. Donna was on sofa with her coat still on, the way people sit when they want it known they don't intend to stay long. Glenn turned when I walked in. "You," he said. "Me," I said. Constance stepped through behind me, portfolio open. Glenn looked at her and actually laughed. "More paperwork?" Constance handed him the trespass notice, the occurrence report, the invoice, and a final letter advising that any further contact from Glenn or Donna Mercer directed at Caden, Amber, or me regarding the cottage, the trust, the invoice, or any matter relating to the Ashby estate would result in all communication being redirected through legal counsel. Glenn read the first 2 paragraphs, and the laugh dropped off his face one line at a time. "You people," he said, "are absolutely unbelievable." Amber came down the hallway. She'd been crying. She was done with that part. "No," she said, "we're done being convenient." Donna looked up from the sofa. Glenn turned to his daughter. "Amber, you don't understand what he's doing to this family." "I understand exactly what he's doing," she said. "He's protecting something my mother-in-law built with her own hands from people who were planning to put a different name on it." Donna flinched. I watched her carefully. That flinch told me she had known about the sign the whole time. Glenn looked past Amber to my son Caden. "Are you going to let her talk to us like that?" Caden moved to stand beside his wife, not in front of her, not behind her, beside her. "Yes," he said. One word. He could not have chosen a better one. Glenn's mouth opened. Nothing useful came out. Constance tapped the invoice once with one finger. "Payment is due Monday." Donna stood, picked up her purse, and touched Glenn on the arm. "Glenn," she said quietly, "let's go." He looked around the room one more time, searching for someone who would hand him back a different outcome. Nobody did. They left without slamming the door. That surprised me slightly, but some kinds of defeat are simply too heavy to carry with any drama left over. The invoice was paid by certified check 3 days later. The cottage was quiet for the rest of that summer. In August, my son Caden and my daughter-in-law Amber came up for a long weekend. Caden fixed the railing on the sunroom steps without being asked, solid and square, the way a cabinetmaker's son knows it should be done. Amber cleaned the kitchen, restocked the cupboards the right way, and found Iris's ceramic loon in a box in the utility closet, where Glenn's people had stored it. I was out on the dock when she called through the window. "Miles, where does this go?" "Windowsill above the sink," I said. "Left of the tap, it's always been there." She said it back. I watched her through the screen, and for a moment, seeing that small white loon back in its place in the window, I had to look out at the water for a while. That evening we cooked outside and ate at the old picnic table as the light went off the lake. After dinner, Caden came around the side of the cottage carrying something wrapped in a beach towel. He set it carefully on the table in front of me. "I did something," he said. "I don't know if it's enough, but I wanted to." He folded back the towel. It was a canoe paddle, hand-painted, a loon in flight on a gray-blue background, and below it, in careful lettering that matched his mother's style as closely as a person who had loved her all his life could manage, Ashby Cottage. Not a copy, an act of attention, an act of grief handled carefully. He said, "I know I can't undo what happened, but I wanted the right name to be where it belongs." I looked at that paddle for a long moment. My hands, when I took it from him, were not quite as steady as I would have liked. "Get the drill," I said. We hung it together above the fireplace, right where it had always lived. Glenn and Donna Mercer have not come back to the property. They have not apologized either, and I stopped expecting it some time ago. I have learned that some people treat apologies the same way they treat property. They only offer them when they expect to get more back in return. My son Caden and my daughter-in-law Amber are still married. Stronger than before, I think, though not in the easy way. Stronger the way wood is stronger when it's been properly stressed and given time to settle. Amber learned that loving your spouse doesn't mean absorbing your parents' worst instincts without a word. Caden learned that the peace you buy by quietly surrendering someone else's boundary is not peace at all. It's just a longer kind of conflict. And I learned something I'll carry for whatever time I have left. The mistake most of us make is believing that protecting what you love and being generous to the people you love are somehow in opposition to each other. They're not. The clearest boundary I ever set was also the most loving thing I could have done for my son and his marriage. It forced Glenn Mercer out of the space between them before he could fill it entirely with his own sense of entitlement. If there's anything worth taking from tonight, let it be this. If you have something worth protecting, a piece of land, a family property, something that carries the fingerprints of someone who is no longer here to speak for it, put it in writing now, while you're calm, before someone else forces your hand. Here's something I'd genuinely like to know. Drop a 1 in the comments if you think calling the OPP the moment I walked in was exactly the right call. Drop a 2 if you think I should have confronted Glenn directly first and given him a chance to leave on his own. And drop a 3 if you think my daughter-in-law Amber should have faced harder consequences for passing that lockbox code to her father in the first place. I'd really like to hear where you land on that. Tell me where in Canada you're watching from tonight, and what time it is where you are. And if you've ever had someone in your own family quietly decide they had a claim to something that was never theirs to claim, I would genuinely like to hear that story from you. The Ashby Family Trust is signed, registered, and sitting in Constance's files with copies in my own safe. The cottage has new locks, a camera, and a gate that clicks shut in a way that is genuinely satisfying every single time. No grandchildren yet, but the fund is there waiting, properly protected, patient. Good things built correctly can afford to wait. Last September I drove up alone for the first time since all of it had settled. The air smelled like birch and cold water. I opened the cottage, set my bag down, and walked straight out to the dock. The lake was completely still. The loons were out near the far shore, the way they always are in the early evening. Behind me, through the screen door, I could see Iris's ceramic loon on the windowsill where it belongs, small and white in the fading light. Above the fireplace, her paddle. I sat on the dock until the sky went dark and the stars came out over the water. The cottage was exactly where it was supposed to be. So was everything inside it.